Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. So today's video I have some recommendations for you with romances that have what I think feels like a very soul level, soulmate, fated type of connection. Not fated mates, not to be confused with the paranormal fated mates, but this is books that I've read where it just feels like these two are soulmates. And some of these are just one example of an author who does this, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the first book that I want to talk about is actually one that I don't think I've mentioned in a really long time, and it is Darling Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. This is part of her Maiden Lane series, a very much beloved series by Elizabeth Hoyt, historical romance. This book I feel like is not talked about often enough, and it is probably my favorite one in the series. It's so beautifully romantic, and it has so many tropes and elements that allow it to be that way. So we have our hero who was sent to Bedlam falsely, so he was sentenced to that terrible prison, and while he was there he was beaten so he can no longer speak, and he manages to escape to try and restore his name to clear his name, and he ends up escaping to a pleasure garden where he just finds this house that is abandoned, and he lives there and sort of just tends the garden under the radar. So also our heroine ends up moving into this pleasure garden area as well. She is the premier actress in London, and she's on the run. Her life is in danger, and so she comes to live there to sort of escape that with her young son. And they meet, the hero and heroine meet, and they have the most beautiful, slow-building romance. There is a little bit of a communication barrier there because he doesn't speak and he can hear her, but she doesn't know why he can't speak, and so she sort of treats him like he can't understand her, and it's just so beautiful and romantic, and these two just felt like they were meant to be together. This hero is so protective of her, and he's also just like so loving and kind. There's a moment where he rescues her little dog from drowning. There's tons of really beautiful moments between him and her son, and it's just one of the best historical romances that I've ever read, and I feel like I haven't talked about it in a really long time, so definitely check that one out. You do get the hero's backstory, why he ends up in prison in previous books, but you could definitely read this as a standalone, even though it's part of a series. Okay, the next book that I have on here is Transcendence. So this book I feel like is one of those that sounds absolutely bonkers, and it sounds like it's going to be a little out there. It sounds like it's going to be melodramatic. It sounds like it's just going to be a hot mess because it's a time-traveling romance where the heroine goes back in time with a caveman and she falls in love with a caveman. Like, I feel like this book had a lot of hype a few years ago. I just read it, I think I read this 2 years ago in 2021 because it was one of my favorite books of that year. And I fell in love with it, and nobody's talking about it anymore. So if anyone is new to romance or hasn't read this book by chance and you want a soulmate type of love, please read this book. It is so beautiful. It had me just sobbing. This is one of the few books that literally made me cry my eyes out because it was so beautiful and heartbreakingly sad, but not like there's a HEA, but also the way that it ends just sort of leaves you just like happy tears, it's just so beautiful. So this again has a communication barrier between the hero and heroine. She goes back in time. She's like, what in the world is happening? She is used to, she comes wearing modern day clothes, and this sweet man, Sweet Ed, all he wants to do is just find a mate and have a family with her, and that's what he believes his purpose is, and it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So it's a very quiet story. There's not like a ton of external plot happening here. It's really just them trying to communicate, him trying to convince her that she's his mate, that they can have a life together, and it's just so absolutely beautiful. And soulmates from two different times, like, I don't know, it sounds out there. And that's one reason why I put off reading it, because I was like, are we serious right now? We're gonna read a caveman romance? And then I read it and I was like, I am shook. My heart is not okay. It was so beautiful. Okay, the next book that I want to talk about is Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas. So this is her most recent release, and it's sort of a crossover between her Wallflowers and Ravenel series. I read this book as soon as it came out, and I was just immediately swept up in it. I loved it. I felt like it was so beautiful. The romance in here felt so fated to me. They felt like soulmates to me. I just adored it so much. So our heroine is a widow at this time, and she's trying to run the business. I think that, is it a whiskey distillery? I can't remember. I didn't look it up. Some type of, I think it's a whiskey distillery of her husband's, who was very successful she did love him and he passed away, and now she is actually a successful businesswoman. She is one of my favorite heroines that Lisa Kleypas has ever written. I really like how she's just so skilled at her job. She's very competent. She's also willing to be soft and tender, and she's my favorite type of heroine in the whole world. So she ends up meeting with a Scottish whiskey distributor, and that's our hero, who comes to town to work out a business arrangement, and they end up having like a lot of like sparks flying when they first meet. They have a lot of chemistry. They have a lot of this feeling of this, there's something like fated and special about this person that I just met, and I love how some authors can really communicate that really well, and in my opinion this is done perfectly. So they meet, and then they end up having one night of passion, which was just beautiful, and then they part ways, they believe, but something tragic happens, and the hero actually ends up losing his memories of that time with her, and she's the one who's nursing him back to health. And she's obviously heartbroken that he can't remember her, but there's a part of him that recognizes her and that feels things for her, but he doesn't know what that is, and it's just so beautiful when he finally gets his memories back. And he saw how she was like stood by him the whole time. It's so beautiful, you guys. I just love it so much. The next book that I have is Between Hello and Goodbye by Emma Scott. This is a beautiful contemporary romance, and this book is one that has like a long amount of time in between when the couple meets and when they finally get their happily ever after. Like, a lot of life happens, and I personally feel like that really lends itself well to romances that feel like soulmate romances, because I think that if you can be separated through time, if you can wait years to be together, that just sort of like gets my old romantic heart all flutter, because I'm like, they are meant to be together. They did not give up on each other, and I just love it so much. So this couple meets when the heroine is having some, she's having a bit of job issues. She's sort of a little bit self-destructing, and her boss is like, look, you gotta pull it together. You gotta pull it together or you're gonna have to leave the job. And so she's like, okay, give me a couple weeks. I'll get my act together and I will come back and be better. So she goes to Hawaii, of course, because, she got the money to do that. And while she's there, she's on this hike, she's trying to have this like spiritual journey, and she ends up getting injured at the top of a mountain and can't come down. She sort of makes it down, but she can't like take care of herself. So in fly the paramedics to the rescue, and the paramedic who rescues her, again, they have that instant attraction, but more than that, it can't just be attraction to be a soulmate connection. It has to be like these two souls that like meet each other, and they just recognize something kindred about the other person, and that's exactly what happened here. He can't stop thinking about her when he drops her off at the hospital, so he ends up showing up to her house and trying to like take care of her, and she's like, you like me. And there's just such great banter. There is some heartache and tragedy in the years that they are apart, but they do come back together in a really beautiful way, and I just loved this book so much. I thought it was perfect. This next book is probably not going to be surprising at all, but it is Restore Me by J.L. Seegers. I feel like I feel like J.L. Seegers does soulmates really, really well. I've only read 3 of her books, but I've really enjoyed all of them, and I think that she has a really deft way of writing that connection that really speaks to me personally. And this book was the first I'd read from her, and it just completely blew me away. It is about our heroine, who is a widow, and she is trying to move on with her life, but she's obviously struggling with that and the grief of moving on from this great love. And we have our hero, who is her dead husband's best friend, who has always had a lot of animosity towards her. We come to find out that they met years before she ever even met her husband in college, and that initial meeting just stayed with our hero for years and years and years, and he has been in love with her ever since. And it's basically, the rest of the book is about her trying to allow herself to love and to feel passion again, and the hero being very gentle and tender and patient, and sort of coaxing her through that process, through a mixture of some very dominant but sweet romantic moments between the two of them. And I loved it. I felt like it was soulmate vibes for sure. I thought it was perfect. Now, I can't do a soulmate romance recommendation video without my one and only, my favorite author. Every single book of hers could be on this list, truly. But I picked Real by Kennedy Ryan because I think that there's so much that this couple goes through that I think really lends itself well to the title of Soulmate Romances. And it's basically our heroine, who is an actress. she was on Broadway when a famous Hollywood director, sees her there and sort of falls for her looks as an actress, not as a person at that time. And he hires her to play the part of a black woman singer at the time in, I believe it's like early 1900s, Harlem, New York. She was this forgotten piece of black American music culture that was very influential, and it's a biopic film. He wants her to play that part. He just knows that she is the one who's going to be perfect for that. And they, of course, end up falling in love. There is a little bit of a forbidden aspect to it because, you know, director, actress. But it doesn't lean into it hard or heavy in a way that feels like over the top. It just feels like this very gradual, slow building. He's definitely grumpy and takes a little while to unravel and show his warmth and kindness to her. But then she has some health issues and he is there for her the whole time. And it just really felt like some of the things that they learn about each other as they're in this relationship, the way that he is there for her always and is always considering and thinking of her, just really made me feel like these two are soulmates and they are meant to be together. And now the last book I have on my list is also a favorite that I have talked about a lot recently, but I had to include it because this book actually is the book that inspired this video, because this is probably, when I think of a soulmate romance book, I always think about this one, and it's The Last Kiss by Anna Bloom. This is a contemporary romance. It is utterly and deeply romantic, and it does have a happily ever after. Rest assured, I will never recommend you, if I am recommending a romance, it will always have a happily ever after, so just have to put that out there. So this book opens with our heroine receiving a medical diagnosis for her heart failure that's basically like, you only have a few more months to live. This is terminal. I can't do anything else for you. So she is so upset about this that she goes out into the night, ends up in a pub, and ends up sitting down right next to this big, beautiful Frenchman who she feels this instant chemistry and connection with. But because of her diagnosis and the fear that she has that she is going to be dying, she is like, I would like to have a one-night stand with you. I mean, it's a lot smoother than this in the book. They end up having a one-night stand, but she's very adamant about no name, no contact. We can't let this go any deeper. But she also wants to live and experience life, and her attraction to him is so strong. They have a one-night stand, and it feels very magical and very kismet type of a thing. And then they have a series of interactions where they run into each other seemingly by chance, even though he lives in France and she lives in England, that just really convey and drive home that message that these are two people that are meant to be together, and their love transcends just a very physical aspect. This is a soulmate type of love, and I just love this book so much. I think it's just so beautiful and so romantic, and I think that if you want a soulmate romance and you haven't read this book yet, it is back on Kindle Unlimited. I would highly recommend that you read it. And yeah, so these are my recommendations for soulmate romances. I love them, and I hope that you do too. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me a red heart, and I will see you in my next one.